All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and finally get my chance to talk, right? Yeah, thank you for inviting me and thanks staff for organizing everything. I'm going to talk about interracial and interethnic marriage among Asian Americans. And I wonder, you may want to ask, why do we care about interracial and interethnic marriages? I think the answer is, social scientists really want to understand, the racial relations, the group boundaries and the social distance across groups. So marriage is a way of telling the kind of relationship between groups and the social distance across them. But you may also want to ask, why do you care about marriage? Not many people are married, right? And people are delaying marriage and forgo their marriage. But I will argue that marriage is still very important. And, certainly for that type of relationship, has a broader implications, really implications and the larger implications in terms of, the kind of a relationship that we are looking at, especially because marriage is more likely to involve children. Children are born into those kind of relationship that they can be mixed race, multiple racial identifications, and all these is going to have an impact on the U.S. given the salience of race relations. So, give you a little bit statistics on Asian America from the U.S. Census. Now in 2020 we have 20 million identified as Asian alone, and really up from 15 million people from 2010. Then now at the same time, because of interracial marriage, interethnic marriage, you also see more Asians identified in combination with another race. So you can see alone or in combination populations reached 24 million, 7% of the population. So Asian alone population grew 36%, and then also interracial, multiracial Asians grew by 56%. So if you look at in the census data, really there's a lot of diversity in terms of Asian identity. There's more than 20 national origins living in every state in the United States. So it is really a very big group. Okay, so now we want to understand why there is interracial marriage. Mostly we're talking about interracial marriage with whites, and also interracial marriage with other racial minorities, right? Like Blacks or Latinos and American Indians. So you have to think about really national origin really matters. You think about, there are, for this discussion, I include mostly, 6 Asian ethnic group and national origin groups. Chinese, has the longest history in the U.S., 1850s, those are gold mines working in California, and also railroads, later on. So but that immigration continues until now and is still continuing. So you can see Chinese is really very diverse with, later generation Asian Americans and Chinese Americans with high socioeconomic status versus more recent immigrants who have low socioeconomic status and have the language issues and have low job skills and things like that. So you can see a very diverse Chinese population. Japanese is really the second, Asian group that immigrated into the U.S. But I think what distinguishes Japanese from other groups is really very few immigrants today, from Japan. So you can see Japanese Americans, mostly U.S. born, very high socioeconomic status. And then I can go quickly and look at Korean, and also, there are more recent immigrants, right? And you see that they tend to have strong ethnic attachment. That's just one thing is because many of them are Christians, go to Christian churches. There's a sense of community. At the same time, there's also a lot of run small businesses and the importance of having communities, families there. And also, you think about Filipino, that would be another group. And it is one of the few groups that does not originate some of the Confucianism, and most of them are Catholics, Spanish, colonized by Spain for a long time, and later on, American presence, and also you see it as, the military presence in Philippines. So Philippine immigrants are pretty unique. They have high education. Many of them are professional, but at the same time, they're Catholics. And so they are more likely to marry, say, Latinos or Mexicans. So they also have jobs like maybe nurses in hospitals. So they have those sense of communities that can be very different, right? And also we look at Southeast Asians, most of them are refugees to begin with. So relatively low socioeconomic status, it's relatively high level of the residential segregation, living in poor neighborhoods. So you can think about that group can be different. South Asians, mostly Indians, it's their high level education, professional, with English proficiency, but at the same time, they are, have a very strong sense of their own, identity. And I think in terms of marriage, they mostly marry among themselves. And then at the same time, you can see South Asians, they're not really part of the East Asians. And in terms of identity, they don't really, identify them well with, some of the East Asian, the other groups that we just talked about. So these are 6 groups, very different in terms of history, immigration, and everything. So that's something, keep in mind. But so we look at nativity, the U.S. born versus, foreign born. That could also impact how they, integrate in the U.S. So we want to look at education at the same time, right? High education versus low education. All that really tells us kind of opportunity for contact, for Asian Americans. What's the chance they meet someone who's white? What's the chance they meet someone who's a racial minority, a Black or a Latino? So relatively size matters, right? And the larger the group's size for white Americans, more opportunities for them to meet with them. But also you can think education matters. And those with high level education are more likely to meet people, maybe meet whites in the workplaces, and more likely to live in better neighborhoods or more advantaged neighborhoods where they see people there. Versus those with lower education and then lower job skills, more segregated workplaces, there's a fewer chance that they will work with, they will meet with whites. So at the same time, you can see those are kind of the opportunities. It's really important to think about the relationship. Right? Then we also, at the same time, in the US, it's the idea of Asian American, I think it's really foreign for us, right? For people living in this side of the world, who's Asian American or who's Asian, right? We are already coming from different countries. So we had a war among ourselves. We spoke different languages, had different religions. We're totally different. But in the United States, somehow we are all lumped together. Asian American, is really the term that describes Asians and various different kinds of national origin groups. So in a sense, you ask all the Chinese immigrants or Korean or Japanese, are they okay to be Asian American? Yes, they say, yeah, we are Asian American, but at the same time, very few of them will tell you they are Asian American. They will say, I'm Chinese, I'm Japanese, right? So that's the origin that matters more. So in a sense is, in the US, all those of Asian descent don't really have this sense of one Asian identity. They want, it's based on all the things, where they're coming from, their history, and but at the same time, I think, you are forced in the country to identify yourself with Asian American. Just in a very simple thing is you do a census. Census will ask you, what's your, race? And one of the possible categories is, there was a time that, there's no clear answer on what Asian Americans is. And there was a lot of community effort, and they think, all Asians want them to be reflected in the census, but they think the only agreement they come up with is let's just list all different national origin groups. And so it's questionnaire. Instead of calling us Asian American, but let's call it, Chinese, Korean or Japanese, different national origin groups together. Unfortunately, the population size is relatively small for each of the national origin groups. So when we do analysis, we always lump them together. We call them Asian American, right? So in a sense, is Asian American identity is really, coming from this data collection effort. The way that how do we collect the data? But it's most importantly, it's also really the perception by others, right? Perception by whites about American society. They really cannot tell us apart, right? Whether you are Chinese or Japanese, I mean, they are just the Asian American. That's really the way, most Asian Americans are perceived and they are seen in that kind of the environment. So that is really something it's important to think about. And not just that we try to be different, we are different, but at the same time, there is this perception that we are the same. Right, we are the same skin tone and other things, that it is something it's important. So, thinking about Asian American, you can think of that as a sort of a new category, sort of new category in the U.S. It's really through the consolidation of ethnic or national origins. But who are the ones who are pioneers of pushing this Asian American identity, right? So this is sort of a question that might be interesting to think about. So that comes to interethnic marriage among Asian Americans. Among Asian groups, who are the ones who are more likely to engage in interethnic marriage? One is you think about opportunity for contact. How do you meet people? You go on a street randomly in the US. What's the chance that you will meet another Asian or another Asian of another national origin group? So what we see typically is Asian American identity is more likely to be formed on college campuses. That's where you see other Asians together. You take classes on Pan-Asian history, and you understand the Asian experiences in the United States. They're more likely you see each other. So that's where college campuses are where you see other Asian ethnic groups. And also, those are then also on the campuses at the same time, there are pan-ethnic activities, right? Those are kind of things you will see, those are kind of different opportunity for contact. And also you will see there's a shared social environment. There's a commonness, even though we think we are different, but in the US, it's a discrimination against Asian in schools, jobs and neighborhoods. And it is really common experience for all Asians, right? Just like a pandemic, it was the, being Chinese, but I don't think most American can tell Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, or other Asians. Then typically they're all treated the same, because whatever. So and also this idea of Asians, it doesn't matter whether you're second generation, third generation, you're forever foreigner. So that's also the kind of pushing those kind of interethnic relations. So I'm trying to understand those two things and, looking into the interracial and interethnic marriage. So the data we're using is American Community Survey from 2008 to 2022. The reason we pull so many years together is just because the sample is small. We had to really gather more of them so that we can do, national group level analysis. So the sample will be different sex, we're looking into opposite sex first married couples, and they are married in the past 3 years. So we just, try to look at the most recent marriages, and it's reflective of the current times rather than, a long time ago. Again, we're looking into the national origin groups, there are 6 of them. But also we look into this 2 Asian groups. For example, you can be Chinese and Vietnamese at the same time. So that's the more common kind of 2 Asian groups that we see in the data. And also we have white in any Asian group, right? Typically there'll be the children born to interracial marriage between whites and one of the Asian groups. And it could also be minority group and Asian group, like Black in the Vietnamese, for example, that could be also one of the relationship. So nativity, we exclude immigrants who came to the US in the past 5 years so that we want to only look at the marriages that were formed in the US, not the marriages formed in the home country and that came to the US. Then we're looking to educational attainment, distinguish between, whether that's college education versus non-college education, and also look at gender, was a male or female. So this is a busy graph. What I want to show you, maybe just look at the first column on the left. That's for men, for Chinese men. And you will see, 76% of the Chinese men marry other Chinese, just Chinese women, right? And then 11% marry other Asian. There may be Japanese, or there could be Koreans or other Asian groups. And 10% marry white, and then 3% marry racial minorities. So this is Chinese men. Then if we move to the next, second for women, also the first column is Chinese women. You can see the Chinese women, 56% of them marry Chinese men, 9% will be other Asian, and 29% are whites, and 6% other minority. Very clear gender differences, right? There's women are much more likely to marry whites and marry across groups compared to men. And you can see the similar data, but it varies quite a bit. So let me just show this graph is a little clearer. It is just to focus on Asians, each national origin group marrying other Asians and also marrying white. So the blue is marrying other Asians and the red is marrying whites. You can see a very tremendous gender differences, right? You can see Asian women are much more likely to marry white men compared to Asian men. And, some of the stories, you can think about it is really interesting gender differences, but really some of these differences are really suggestive rather than conclusive. The reason is national origin group varies so much by size. You have a bigger Chinese group versus smaller Korean group, for example. They think that affects the opportunity for contact, right? Just to think about how you meet people outside, and then your group is very small, so your chance of meeting someone in your group will be very small. Then you are much more likely to meet somebody else, right? So it is important we think about multiple national origin groups. They're so different in population size. Then all these results can be misleading, right? So it is important we want to do some statistical analysis, try to control for those initial group size differences. So that's what we are doing is, we use the log linear models. In a sense, it's sort of we understand, the group size affects the intermarriage, and then we're controlling for group size differences, just thinking about how you meet people on the street. So what's the chance, given your size, given your group, it really varies quite a bit. So that, model can also control for marginal distribution of in national origin, marriage order, nativity, education attainment, that in simple words, you just to say, so our comparison will be fairer if we use this model controlling for all the group size differences. So here is the kind of models that we're thinking about. We're really doing this very simple graph. We're looking, for example, we're looking at the U.S.-born Chinese, and then other Asian wives and white wives, and also others. So it's kind of a 8x8 tables. We're looking to Chinese marrying Chinese themselves, marrying other Asians, right? Marrying whites and marrying other minorities. So we do the same thing for Japanese, Koreans, for these replicating these table. So we try to compare their rates of marriage. So this is a better graph. I think it's just controlling for the sizes. What you see here that, we're looking at the Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, Southeast Asians, and the South Asians. And then you look at the two blue lines, it's really US men, US Chinese men, for example, marrying other Asians, and then US women marrying other Asians, right? And then kind of the brown colored bars is more marrying whites versus Chinese men marrying whites, Chinese women marrying whites. So you can see the gender difference is still there, but it's much smaller than what we just saw earlier. And also you can see interethnic marriage is really strong. Interethnic marriage with other Asians are pretty strong, especially for the Chinese and Japanese and Koreans. I think interethnic marriage is much more likely to occur among East Asian groups. And just because of maybe there's some Confucianism, the kind of a culture there, and make it more possible that these groups are engaging into marriage. But Filipinos, at the same time, you can see interethnic marriage lower. And also look at the last one is South Asians, mostly including Indians, mostly Indians. It's a very low level of marriage with other Asians, relatively low level of marriage with whites, and also low levels of marriage with other minorities, right? So interesting is to look at Filipinos, they're more likely to, marry other minorities. It is in a sense we talk about Catholicism and also, so their unique feature, English speaking ability. So those are sort of the things. So let me just summarize some of the basic findings we have. One is interethnic marriage among Asians is more common than interracial marriage. So it is something, starting in the older days, you're much more likely to marry whites, but I think now we're seeing there's more interethnic marriages. Especially important to point out, I don't share the data, but we have the analysis. US-born college-educated Asian Americans are most likely to form interethnic marriage. We talk about the college and also the opportunity for contact is different. Then we see Asian women are more likely to be interracially and interethnically married than Asian men. So women in general are much more likely to cross boundary, to marry somebody of different race or ethnic groups compared to men. That sort of reflecting to sort of the tradition, what we expect in men in maybe Asian culture versus women. So that is important to think about. The other is college-educated Asians are more likely to form interracial marriage than the less educated counterparts. And then for those with less education, they're much more likely to form national origin endogamy, just marry among themselves, but they are more likely to cross nativity. In other words, less educated US-born Chinese are more likely to marry foreign-born Chinese, rather than marrying other people in the market. So, people talk about interracial marriage, interethnic marriage, always think about assimilation. But in the US context, you're thinking about assimilation to white culture and whites. But I think in our particular analysis, we do see assimilation is really in a lot of different ways, interethnic, forming this new Asian American identity. That could also be one of the assimilation, whatever you think about what assimilation really means, but it's really integration in that sense. Then we see this strong presence of Asian American identity. And then we do see gender differences. Women in general are much more likely to cross. They're more likely to engage in exogamous, what we call intermarriages, than same race marriages. But you look at the national origin group, I think Japanese, being older, being in the US for a long time, very few new, Japanese coming to the US, they are really the most integrated. They are much more likely to marry other Asians. They're more likely to marry whites. They're also more likely to marry other minorities. So this is something South Asians, for example, is the least integrated. And we also see East Asians, especially Korean, Japanese, and Chinese, are more likely to form this interethnic marriages, especially among those with higher levels of education. And the Filipinos and the Southeast Asians, more interracial marriage, with other racial minorities. So there you go. You really see a very diverse pattern of interracial and interethnic marriages among national origin groups from Asia. Thank you.